Shantel talking? You point when it's time. Not quite the look, huh? Yeah, use the intro, Rhea. Yeah, we can. I want to talk to the mic a few times and then turn it. And then there's also an audience, so you can talk. Yeah, back row back. Thank you, 'cause I was going to ask. Welcome to the heights, changing lives for the kingdom. Welcome to the heights, changing lives for the kingdom. Welcome to the heights, changing lives for the kingdom. Welcome to the heights, changing lives for the kingdom. Well, hello, my friends. It is a pleasure to welcome you again to another special edition of Happening at the Heights with Pastor Cook. But this edition looks very different than our normal Friday segments. Tonight I'm having a conversation on mental health and the importance of mental and emotional health care. And I still say to you, this is the day that the Lord has made, and we will rejoice and be glad in it. So we are glad that you've taken some time to tune in. Why don't you take a second, call somebody, text somebody, tell them they need to turn on Lincoln Heights on YouTube, on Facebook, because we've got news that they can use. Don't let them hear about it later. They need to hear that right now there's a blessing that is waiting on them, and they'll want to be a part of this. I am so glad today to welcome to our church one who is not a stranger, who we have worked with before, but this is a new opportunity as we're discussing mental and emotional health care and the relationship of mental and emotional health care to the Black church. I am thrilled to welcome the minister, Dr. Shantel Thomas. Can we give her a round of applause and welcome her, even our virtual family? Let's welcome her. Dr. Thomas is quite accomplished. She is the president and CEO of Sound Mind Counseling Services. She received both her Bachelor of Arts and her Master's of Education from the University of Toledo, where she attended on a full athletic scholarship. All right. She's had a stellar career as a sprinter, traveling the world and competing and earning various honors. So she is both a gifted counselor and a gifted athlete. Dr. Thomas was inducted into the University of Toledo's Hall of Fame and selected as one of Cincinnati's leading women. Amen. And so we are just thrilled to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here with us for this important conversation about mental health and the Black church. So, Dr. Thomas, your biography and your professional experience is so impressive. Are there other things about you that we should know? Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
So, a little bit about me. So yes, those things. I'm very humbled. God is great, and it's because of Him that I am, and all of those blessings have come from Him. So I started out a little bit about me. I'll just start from when I was a young child. I went through some trauma when I was a kid, 8 years old, had some pain. Then from there, my dad was incarcerated, so he actually passed away while he was in prison. My biological father, my stepfather, is still living. In high school, I was the woman or the young girl that everybody told all their secrets to. I knew the ones who were pregnant, I knew the ones who were fighting, I knew the ones who were stealing, and I ran track. I was angry, and I was in ISS a lot, so almost up for expulsion senior year in high school. So people don't believe it, but I went to Princeton, right over here, Princeton High School. Had some issues there, but I had to make a decision. I told one of my girlfriends, I said, I'm not happy, life isn't good, I'm angry that my father was in prison, lied often and said, oh, he lived overseas and he was, absent. He was absent, but I would say he was gone because he was working. So all of those things are the reasons that I do what I do today. So I am who I am because I went through all of that trauma and that pain, and I had to make a decision when one of the security guards at Princeton said to me, there's a bet out. They're saying you're not going to graduate because you're so angry, you're so mean, and you've gotten in all this trouble. And I had to make a decision. Either I'm going to take the path and be like my father or be like my mother, who had decided to start her own business. She was a fashion designer. She moved us from Indianapolis to Cincinnati for a better life, married someone. And so I had this decision to make. And I told my girlfriend, I'm like, life is horrible. And I had a great, great aunt who always told me, Jesus can do anything. He can heal you. He can help you through anything. And I just heard her voice one day. And I told my girlfriend Dan, I said, I think I need to go to church, And so from there, I went to church with her, went to church with my stepfather's friend, and I was like, God, do something, because I could see that I was going to be one of those statistics, one of those teenagers. And so I came back and decided I was going to run for God. I had a track coach who was great, and he said, you're good at listening, so what do you think about psychology? And I thought, what is that? Never heard of it. So I took a class my junior year in high school, and then he taught the class my senior year in high school. And he was like, people talk to you and tell you things, and you can keep secrets. That's what a psychologist does. And I was like, oh, well, let me look at that in college. And so I went to college, and the rest is history. I told the Lord when I was in college, I said, hey, I'm going to live for you. I'm going to run for you. And I want to help people heal and live and be well. And so when I was in college, I told my professor, I said, hey, I want to open a Christian counseling private practice. And she said, they don't go together. Christian and counseling don't go together. One is secular, and it's mental, and the other one is all faith-based, and you can't put those two together. And I said, watch me. Watch me. And she said, okay. And now she calls me back and says, you did it. And she says, I tell everybody about your practice and how you can bridge, these two can work together. I'm like, you can be a Christian and you can receive therapy. There are therapists in the Bible, godly counsel, And so therefore, that is how a Sound Mind Counseling came about. I told the Lord, I want to start a private practice, a Christian private practice. And I had this wonderful name, Majestic Metamorphosis. People were going to be transformed. And the Lord said, that is not it. You will not name my practice Majestic Metamorphosis. And so I was reading the Bible with my girlfriend one day, and she said, let's just look. And so we started searching, and she said, I said, something with the mind, and we just kept searching. And then 2 Timothy 1:7, just illuminated off the page. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And that's where the private practice name came from.
Wow.
And that's my story.
That is an amazing story of what God can do. And you know what I like about your story so much is that it's a real testament to the fact that it's never too late. That as we watch young people develop and we see them, hit periods where it doesn't seem like things are going well, it's so important not to give up. It's so important to keep pushing those lessons of love and of care and sometimes of even tough love, right? To make sure that they know that you still believe in the dreams that you have for them and that God has for them. So just thank you for sharing that. So let's start here. What would you want people to know about mental and emotional health care that you don't think most people know?
So when I think about the people that come into the practice, some will say to me, I'm here, but I don't want my family to know that I'm here. Don't call my house, don't leave messages. Even today, and my practice, all but one are AfricanAmerican therapists, counselors, Christian, and the people we serve, the majority, 80% are African-American clients. And we still today hear, no, don't tell anyone I'm here. My family says, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You can do this by yourself or just pray, pray about it, it'll go away. And so what I want everyone to know is that just like you go to the primary care doctor once a year to get your checkup, mentally you need to come see the mental health therapist once a year just to get that checkup. Because in a year, different things can happen that will affect your mind. Different things will happen. COVID, no one thought we'd be locked away for 3 years now and isolated, but divorce rate tripled, suicide rates tripled. Anxiety, depression, agoraphobia. I still have clients who have not left their home. And it's almost 3 years. Everything is delivered. They made it easy. And so don't be afraid to live. I would say that. And know that your mental health, everything happens in the mind, right? Everything starts in the mind. The mind is where everything begins. So that's why the Bible talks about having a sound mind and having the mind of Christ. Right, so we're not double-minded. So there's a lot of scriptures around the mind and how to be whole. And so I tell people you have to work on your mind as well as your body. If the doctor says to you, take this medicine and it'll stop it'll help with high blood pressure, it'll help with diabetes, or it'll help with the pain, we're quick to take it. But if someone says, take this medicine because your thoughts are not right and you're suicidal, or you're depressed, or you're homicidal, we don't want to take it. Because I'm not crazy. We were taught, handle it. Don't tell people your business. Keep it at home, in our community. And the thing is, that's killing us. So we need to learn how to save ourselves and save those in our family. The research says if we just ask the question, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about hurting someone else? Most people will answer yes. 85% of people will say, yes, I am. Yes, I want to hurt myself. Yes, I want to hurt that person who hurt me. And so that's just ask, are you thinking about killing yourself or killing someone else? So real simple.
Let's move deeper into that. Historically, you know that the Black church has been the preserver at its best. It's been the preserver of Black life. And so it is central very often to our communities, to our families. It's very often the only place that some people will come and begin that therapeutic conversation.
Right, yes.
So what do you think then should be or needs to be the relationship between the historic Black church and mental and emotional health care and well-being? What should that relationship look like?
So I helped my church start a mental health ministry. So we're called POM, Peace of Mind, Peace of Mind Ministry. And so we started that about 4 years ago because there was such an outcry of, you could just hear people screaming and moaning, and I'm like, that's not a I'm welling before the Lord, that's something's going on in my mind. So I can hear the difference in some of the other women and men who are in mental health. You can hear the difference in the moans and the cries. And so we said we need to do something about it. And so there's an organization called the American Association of Christian Counselors. They have lay counselors, those are people who aren't, didn't go to school for mental health, but you say, hey, I want to help in my church. And so you take some classes, you get certified, get some training, and then you can start a mental health ministry. And so what has to happen is we have to begin, like the Word of God says, the issues of the heart run deep, but the man of godly counsel can help draw them out. That godly counsel are the therapists, the lay counselors, the people in the church community that want to help. And so I've helped 4 or 5 different churches start those mental health ministries, because now we're at the place where we see that the pastor's tired, right? He can't do it all. 2 or 3 other people can't do it all.
Often needs mental health support
right.
herself or himself.
Yes, right, exactly, yes. And I would say, who helps the leader when the leader needs help? Where do they go to? Who do they turn to? And so we have to have our support as well, because people don't see us as people. But we're not, I tell people, just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean I don't have issues that happen in my life. No one can hang a sign out that says no issues here, that there's nothing happening in your life. At some point in time, we all go through some heartache, some pain, some stress, some loss. We're going to, if we live, it's going to be a part of life. We don't want it to come, but it does. But how are we going to manage it and process it and work through it? And so if we can join and bridge, yes, this is the best place to come. Because the research says, just from listening to worship music, our brains change and they heal. It's the fastest way to seek healing, just listening to worship music. But we're not taught that in school, And some churches don't say, hey, just get on the ground and listen to the music, rock, wail, moan before the Lord. So it's not taught what worship music can do. And the way, again, it changes the brain waves, the mind becomes more at peace. So every morning I tell my clients, get up, listen to some worship music, just 7 minutes a day. 7 minutes a day, you can improve your mental health by 50%. The stress, right? You can take some stress away just by listening to some worship music. If you don't have that, then jazz or classical. So those 3. So there are small things we can do, but we have to begin to give that education about mental health across the pulpit, in classes, Bible study, and bridging it. I did a session once where I talked about depression in the Bible and me. And so I went through all the different people in the Bible who had depression at some time. There are 12 different types of depression, but most of us just know about clinical depression, the one where you have to take medicine. The rest of them, you don't have to take medicine. There's situational depression. That's where this situation is happening. Maybe I just lost a child, or I went through a divorce, or I moved from one city to the next, and so everybody I loved is in Florida, but now my job moved me to Cincinnati, and I'm grieving that. So I have situational depression. And so that goes away just through talk therapy. No medicine needed. Atypical depression, this is where I'm sad and my body hurts and it aches. So I have leg pain, I have back pain, I have arm pain, I have headaches. It's atypical depression because it causes body aches and pains. You don't need medicine for that. You just need talk therapy. So there's all these different types of depression that are there. There's seasonal affective disorder. It's cold outside, the sun isn't shining, I don't want to get out, I want to pull the covers over my head and just lay here and not deal with anything. But when spring comes and the birds are singing, I have all this energy, are the winter blues, as they've been called. So these things we have to talk about, and so now they're being talked in the church. Before it was, let's not talk about it, let's not deal with it, but now pastors like you, Pastor Cook, are saying, let's have these conversations and let's talk about our mental health, because it's always been here, but we've been trying to pray it away, or we don't talk about it, or let's sneak in late at night and call the pastor on the phone or meet him, and we don't let anybody see us. So,
absolutely.
And so, of course, I have pastors, I have worship leaders, I have a lot of people that now are saying, I just need this so that I'm doing my check-in, I'm not depressed, I don't have anxiety, I'm not schizophrenic, but I need somebody to talk to just to make sure I'm okay and to maintain my mental health.
We have a lot of people who watch us, some who attend this church, but a lot who don't attend this church. They're a part of other ministries. Some are pastors, some are deacons and leaders in their congregation. What would you say to that leader who might be watching us, who wants to start something in their church, but just doesn't think they can? Where should they start? What's a practical step that they can take right where they are right now to get something started?
I would say start by having either whether it's a comment box or you have some place where you can say, hey, take this assessment online, or what is it, Survey Monkey, or you could send it to the congregation and say, would you be interested if we offered mental health services, or if we had just maybe a meeting or a group, would you attend? And then once you get the responses back, just because in different communities here, so if we put in Lincoln Heights, I think I put in that once, and the percentage of people who say they have mental health issues was like 19.9%. I did Avondale, 27.9%. So the different, you can actually go and put that in and say, so there are people who need it, and they're right here in the community, but they are afraid they'll fill in a survey and say, I need it, but unless someone says, I'll take you, I'll go with you, or it's right here, they won't come. So when we started talking at some of the different churches about mental health, they had a whole lot of people that said, yes, and if it's offered in my church, I will go, because of course the church is the safest place, right? There's healing here, there's comfort, we're a family, so I feel safe here already. And so if I feel safe in my church, and now this is another extension of the church, then the research says people will come.
Let's take the next step. You've mentioned grief several times. Let's talk about grief. So we just seem to be coming to the other side of this pandemic that's been going on really ravaged our communities, in particular yes. African-American communities.
Yes.
For the last 2.5 years, we've seen the deaths of well over 1 million Americans. Just unprecedented levels. Even in my own ministry, since 2021, I have performed more funerals right. than at any other point in my ministry. And so that's a direct result very often of the pandemic and so on and so forth. What can you tell us about how to healthily journey through grief, right? Okay. Because we can journey through grief and just sort of passively move through it, but what are some ways to healthily, we gotta go through it, it's right. a part of life,
yes.
but how do we do it without getting stuck?
Okay, so I'm trained in grief, and this is one of my favorite areas to talk about. So
have fun, here we go.
So, I always talk about how when we grieve, there's different types of grief. And you have to know your grief cycle first. And most people don't know I have a grief cycle. So when we grieve, we have a cycle. And if you don't know it, then you don't know how long you'll go through it. For some people, it's 6 months. For some people, it's 2 weeks. For some people, it's 4 years. You have to know how long do I grieve. So let me go through some of the ones that are most common. The loss of a child. So people will say, get over it, you can have more children, especially if it was stillborn or a baby, it's all right, you can move on from that. Well, the research says it takes 9 to 11 years to recover from a loss of a child. So we can't say, it's been 3 years, stop grieving. It's been 6 years, you're not over that yet? 9 to 11 years, just to get to a place where I can accept that my child is gone. So we have to be patient and kind and loving. Sometimes I have a client, her son has been gone 7 years. She said, I just feel like I can breathe. 7 years. And so for us, we're thinking, wow, but I haven't lost a child. My 2 sons, Gideon and Micah, are still here, so I can't walk that walk. And so the loss of a parent and the loss of a sibling, anywhere from 5 to 7 years. A parent, your parent has been with you your whole life, and they could be 84 or they could be 50. But again, it's going to take you some time, because when I want to get up and call, I can't. Or I might think I smell my mother's perfume, or I might see her face. And so there's different things that happen when we're grieving. The loss of a spouse, 5 to 7 years. So a divorce, 3 to 5 years. And the research says when you go through a divorce, you're supposed to take 2 years off just from dating, just to grieve, just to learn who am I now that I'm no longer with this person, because I have my individual identity and my couple identity. Now I'm back to my individual identity, so I have to know who I am again. So there's different types of grief, and they all have some time frames that go along with them.
I love that point, because that's something that I often see as a pastor, is that we only name grief when it's related to death. Mm-hmm. And so your point about there being many types of grief. No, grief could be, I lost a job. Grief could
yes.
be the loss of a relationship.
Yes.
Grief could be the loss of a dream, right? I thought I was going to play for the NBA, and then one day I realized that this dream I was aiming for just wasn't going to happen, right?
My knee blew out my knee.
Exactly.
You know, and I can't.
So how do we have those robust understandings of grief?
So you can grieve a million things. Like you said, the loss of a job, move to a new city. I have kids. Their parents moved them across town. So all the friends I knew here in 6th grade, I have to start all over. As an adult, I have to start all over. So we're going to grieve what we knew, what we were comfortable with. And so when we get to that, there's 2 types of grief. There's good grief and bad grief. I just do it that way to keep it simple. Bad grief is I don't talk about it. I don't want to, hey, my mother passed away. We don't want to talk about that anymore. Christmas is here. I don't celebrate Christmas or Thanksgiving because I don't want to deal with the grief or the loss of losing someone around that time, or if it's a marriage. And when someone isn't grieving well because they talk as if it happened today.
That is so good.
But it happened 7 years ago, 20 years ago, but they talk about it as if it's happened today. That's how I know, okay, I need to refer them. If it's a family member, friend, I have to refer. So I'll refer them to someone. If it's my client, then the way you begin to process it is there's a lot of different ways to manage and deal with grief and go through the good grief. Bad grief, again, is isolation, not talking, saying I don't want to deal with it, kind of like putting your head under the covers. And people don't understand when people lose pets, it's the same thing as going through a bad relationship or losing a child. So that pet, it's not like, oh, I bought you a new dog. You can't just give me another dog if I've had this dog for 20 years. Pets are like people's children. And so in our minds, we have to begin to think of that because the biggest offense is trying to tell them to replace something they love that passed away. And so when we have the conversation, it is listen for, are they speaking as if this person passed away yesterday or 2 weeks ago? And then when you ask, well, when did this happen? And they say, oh, it's been 15 years. Oh, it's been 6 years. Oh, it's been 7 years. That's a bad grief sign. A good grief sign is, I talk about the person, my mother passed away 10 years ago, and I miss her a lot, but I know she would want me to live and go on. So I'm speaking and I'm moving through the process. And so when you go through good grief, there's like 12 different stages. Most people know Kubler-Ross is 5, but there's other ones. So some people deal with guilt. They deal with isolation. They ask the question why a lot of times over and over again. But those are stages. And so when we go through them, most people stay in anger and sadness anywhere from a year to 3 years. And then they'll begin to move on. But we have to allow people to be angry and even be angry with God. So people are mad. My mother-in-law passed away, and my oldest son, Gideon, that was his woman. He might have been 13, and he said, I prayed, and I asked God to heal Honey Mom, and he didn't. He's like, so I'm not asking him for anything else in life. And he was like, and you can't make me. And so for 2 years, my son, he would go to church and he would sit there with his arms folded. And I was like, God, I know he's here, so he's hearing you, but he's not hearing you. And I know he went from reading the word and knowing everything and answering all the questions to, I have nothing to say. And it took him about 3 years to get to the place. And people are like, why aren't you making him come? Why aren't you? Because at this time, he's 16, he's 17. But I didn't want to push him to do because he's just going to run away from it, And so it's giving him time to heal. And even now, it's been 7 years, he still has that pain. But I'm not going to push him and say, get over it. That's your grandmother. She's been gone 7 years. The process, I'm walking it out with him. He'll get there. And that's all of us. We'll get there. But time is the only thing that heals grief. And you have to let everybody have their own time. But you need to know your grief process. When my biological father passed from cancer in prison, when I got the call, I was like frozen. And I couldn't believe it, even though I knew they said 4 months. And it was 3 months. And I said, he left a month too soon. He's supposed to have 4 months, but it's cancer. Nobody knows. But again, it's one of those things where I was okay. And then 4 months later, I was holding my son, and I just lost it. I had my cry, and I knew what it was, and I had to let the process go. So for 2 weeks, I lost a little weight. I couldn't think straight. I didn't do any work in the practice. I just stayed home, and I allowed myself to grieve. And I was better. But, you have to allow yourself space. In the Bible, people wore sackcloth and ashes, and they took all the time they need. People knew they were grieving, and they let them grieve, right? Now, work gives you 3 days and say, keep it moving. So we have to take care of ourselves. You might need more than 3 days, and you have to ask for that. Or you go to a therapist or your primary care, and we can put you off on FMLA. I've had parents I've put off for a year, take a year off, because they weren't grieving well, and they were trying to work, and then work was saying, you're not performing well, so now you're on a performance review because you're grieving. And so use that time to take care of you. Take all the time you need to get to a place where you can function well, and it's okay. Nobody's going to say you're crazy and nothing's wrong, because grief is different for all of us.
So you've already touched on this, so it moves us in that direction. Let's talk about stigma for a little bit, because that's a reality of any conversation that you have in African American communities about mental health, right? Dealing with the historic, cultural stigma about Black mental health and about Black mental capacity, right? And so how do we deal with the stigma around mental health in African American communities, knowing that it is a product of racism and white supremacy? It's a product of a lack of access that is often is just not available in communities of color. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I see that that's shifting. I mean, people like you are a great example that that's shifting. And churches like Lincoln Heights, where we're having these conversations, are examples that this tide is changing. Probably not as fast as we might need it to, but it is shifting. How do we deal with the stigma, especially racialized and gender stigma around mental health care?
So the racialized piece, I think that, like you said, it's starting to change, but there's still, like I said, we still have a lot of people that are saying, don't tell that I'm coming, and don't call my house or send an email, things like that. So we have to let people know it's okay to get help. And what I found is when, you know, pastors, leaders, and other people say, hey, I go, or I've gone, and sometimes I go to say, this is my therapist right here, and people are like, wow, well, if he's doing it or she's doing it, then I can do it and be okay. So sharing is helpful. Yeah, traditionally, it was considered a rich, white privilege to do. And now anybody on any insurance, we offer pro bono services. We do sliding fee scale, so we don't turn anybody away. And I started a nonprofit just for that reason, because I still have people that said, you know, I can't afford to bring my child, or I can't get there. So we were like, we'll go to the schools. So we're in some of the schools and providing some free therapy for kids and teens that have experienced trauma. So again, we have to stop the stigma by saying it's okay to receive help. We receive help for everything else. You know, if you need somebody to pick you up and take you to work, or you need help financially or spiritually, we go to the spiritual counselor, we go to the financial counselor, you know, so why not go to the mental health counselor for that help? And so I guess the more that we talk about it and the more that we share, that is something I tell people. When I was in college, I was struggling with, you know, what do I do? Do I stay here? Do I go somewhere else? And I went and I talked to a therapist. And my mentor said the best therapists seek therapy. And so the people who are most healthy, the research says, have been to therapy, because they understand that it's just somebody who's non-judgmental, who's there to help you process out the thoughts that are reoccurring in your mind. So it says that, you know, healthy people will go, even if it's just once, again, that 1 year annual checkup, to say, these things have happened in my life over the year, and am I okay? And I have people that have been coming back 10 years, and I'm like, yes, you're okay. You lost 7 people last year. Maybe let's make sure you're dealing with the grief well. Or I've gotten fired from 10 jobs, and now I'm angry this year. Well, let's process the anger. So, you know, there's different things that can happen. Doesn't mean that you're crazy or something's wrong, and we have to stop saying, you're crazy if you seek a therapist, you know.
And that's a big part of I mean, that's a cultural stereotype, right?
Yes.
The crazy Black woman, the crazy Black man is a big part of what inhibits many people from seeking mental health services.
Right. Exactly. Yes, and so that's what, you know, so I tell people, stop. If you use that, stop. You know, it's one of those things, to stop saying that, and everybody's crazy. And, you know, we always have, oh, that's that uncle that, you know, he's tripping, or she's always mad. You know, maybe that's the grief, because grief comes out as anger. Depression comes out as anger. Traditionally, the research has shown that men display depression as anger. So I'm not dealing with that, I'm tired, or leave me alone, or kids, get out of here, you know. And women show sadness. But that's not always the case. I have a lot of women who are angry, short-tempered, and mean, as they say. She's just mean. Well, have you ever thought that maybe she's in pain and she's hurting? So the depression is coming out as sadness, or it comes out as anger, or it comes out as isolation. And so we have to be aware of what the warning signs are, too. They don't look the same as they do in the white community, you know.
That's big. Can you take us through some of those warning signs? Just give us a list. You've given us some already.
Yes.
Just take us through a few more of those, so that we can know. You can know that person in your house, you may need to help connect them to something.
Right. Yes.
Let's go through that list.
Okay. So when we look at anger, I already talked about the depression. It may show up as anger. Sometimes it's attention deficit, and people think people are angry, but it's really ADHD, because you can be irritable with ADHD or adult attention deficit. You can be shy. You can be impulsive, or you can be very cautious. I'm not going to do anything. So when you have a child or you have a person in your house, it's like, I don't know why my husband or my wife, they're great and they're very smart, but they just won't do anything. They don't have any motivation, or they're lazy, as we say, right? I tell them to clean the gutters or vacuum, and they're tired after work. So it could be the fear. And so fear, even though in their mind is racing, they're thinking, well, if I do it, if I don't, what does that mean? Or if I do it wrong, is she going to say something, or is he going to say something? So they don't do anything at all. So that could be a sign of anxiety, or it could be a sign of depression. So depression and anxiety, I call them twins. They walk together. Because sometimes people are very, very anxious, and it gets them to be very sad and afraid. And so it creates a depression, because they're overthinking so much that they don't do a lot of things. And so because I'm anxious about, is it right? Am I doing it wrong? So when you have a child that says, is that right? And they get straight A's, and you're like, yes, it's right. You got it right. Are you sure? Can I do better? But you have straight A's. So they're overthinking. Or if it's somebody who sits back and says, I know I'm smart, but I question my ability every day, and I get great evaluations at work, but I still think I'm not doing right, and I think everybody's looking at me all the time. Or if someone says, don't look at me, or they dress nice, but they're like, am I okay? Does this look okay? Are you sure? So that's a sign of anxiety. And so again, just thinking about if someone, another sign, if you have someone who paces often, when they're on the phone, they just can't sit still, or they're fidgeting all the time, or twirling their hair, picking with their eyelashes, or always sitting and tapping. So those are some signs of anxiety. When kids play their music very, very loud, I often tell parents they might be trying to drown out the noise. So you're like, turn down the music, but they have so many other sounds in their head. And so you need to ask, what are you thinking about? Where are your thoughts at? That
is so good.
And so then you'll know, because they might say, well, this is going on. And so when I have kids say, I play my music loud all the time, and my mother, and I'm like, well, is the music drowning some noise out for you? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, what do you need? I often ask my teenagers, what do you need? And sometimes they're like, just somebody to listen. But my mother won't listen. My father won't listen. They always got the answer. They have something to say. Just listen. And sometimes with my kids, they're now 21 and 23. I'm like, oh, I want to jump in. But I ask them, what do you need? What do you need from me right now? And they will say, Mom, I just need you to listen. One of my sons said when he was 16, I need to talk to somebody before I kill somebody. And I was like, let me get in here and find out who I can, call quickly, And then when the younger one came and said, at 20, I need to talk to somebody. Not you, no one in your practice, but I need a therapist. And I was like, okay, what's going on? He said, just some thoughts circulating through my head, and they're louder, they're getting louder. So we have to be, whether it's a young adult, and I check in every day, how you doing? What's going on? Anything going on that I need to be aware of? And I ask my girlfriends that too, every day. Are you okay? Do you need any help? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? And I've gotten yeses sometimes over the years, and I've gotten, hey, do you have a therapist I can talk to? So we just need to check on our loved ones all the time, because again, the thoughts are there, and we have anxiety and depression, again, has tripled since COVID. Suicidal thoughts have tripled since COVID. So I'm looking at the research in our community and seeing what has happened, divorces, and have tripled. You know, some of those even more, up by 5%, up by 50%, up by 75%. So what can we do? Because nobody expected to be home with their spouse. Some people go to work to get away, you know? Then they come home and I can handle it. But if I'm here all day long with the wife, the husband, or the kids, or the grandparents, whoever's in the home, if you go from being 2 to now there's 9 all day long, that's a different dynamic that plays out. And so we have to say it's okay to say, I'm not okay. I'm not okay today. And that's what I told my kids. There were times when I tell them, hey, Mom had a rough day, so I need you just to give me 10 minutes to go upstairs, lay on my bed. I would do deep breathing, listen to my worship music, then I'll come downstairs and engage, because I need to shift from work to home to be present. And so we need to be okay with saying, I need to take my time. The research says if we don't have at least 4 hours in a week where we do nothing for anybody else and just focus on self-care, we're not healthy. And I ask all my clients.
Can you say that again? That's good. No, say that again.
Yeah, so if you're not taking at least 4 hours in a week where you're doing nothing for anybody else and just taking care of yourself, you're not healthy. And when we think about that, we give 4 hours. We give 80 hours plus to work. We might give 10 or 15 to taking care of our kids or our spouse or cooking or cleaning. If you add up all the time, you're doing way more for everybody else if you're not doing that for you. And now you're operating on burnout, stress. And stress is called the silent killer for a reason. It will kill you. 4 hours a week will help you keep your stress level down by 70%.
I think we just got one of our challenges for our freedom in mind this year, Living Free in 23. We're going to make sure we get those 4 hours a week in of care. That's a great challenge. Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to pause briefly just for station identification. This again is Lincoln Heights Missionary Baptist Church, a special segment of Happening at the Heights with Dr. Shantel Thomas, Minister Dr. Shantel Thomas, who has graced us with her presence and done such a phenomenal job. I want to ask you one more question before we turn to our viewers and those who are our in-person guests for some questions as well. Of course, we all held our breath a few weeks ago as another video of another black person being brutalized by law enforcement circulated throughout the country, throughout our world, social media, internet. Tyree Nichols, who was beaten and ultimately killed by Memphis law enforcement, several officers from Memphis law enforcement. What can you tell us about dealing with those images? I mean, social media, one of the gifts has been, right, for some people, they have been able to see for themselves what many black folks and other folks of color have been saying has been happening for years, right? But of course, one of the downsides of that is, regardless of our race, the consistent consumption of those images. And especially for people of color. How do we healthily deal with the circulation of those images? And I would go a step further. How do we talk to children about those images?
So that's always tough. You know, it's a tough conversation to have with a child. Because of course they ask why, and especially when African-American boys, and I have 2 of them, so we've had these conversations for years and training. I've had my boys trained how to be arrested. You know, this is how, I have friends that are police officers, this is how you get arrested, this is what you need to do. They come in and they tell them, so I can make sure my African-American boys come home. Absolutely. And so the conversation has always been, you know, around what we can do to make sure we live. And we shouldn't have that conversation.
Your job is to get home.
Right, your job is to get home.
Your job is to get home. Right.
The white parents aren't having that conversation with their friend. And so my kids have friends of other cultures and colors, and they're like, my white friends don't even know what that is, to have to come home, to make it home safely, and what they need to do to make sure they make it home safely. And so with that, I tell everyone, you can't watch the images over and over and over again, because what happens, it creates trauma. So every time we watch it, we're traumatized by it, right? So if you watch it 5, 6, every time they show it on the news, every time it pops up on social media, it's called re-traumatization. So you never get past the trauma because every time you watch it, you hurt yourself again. You're angry, you're frustrated, you want to yell, scream, whatever it is, you cry. So you never get a chance to heal. So I know, so I'm trained in crisis intervention, so I travel all over the world. When there's mass shootings, I'm called in. When people are killed, situations like this, I'm called in. And so when I saw that, I said, Lord, I can't do another one. I can't go. So there are times that they'll call, and I receive the text, and they'll tell me where you're just being dispatched to, and I'll say, no, not this time. So when New York happened, I got the call. And I had just left somewhere else because these happen so much. They're not televised all the time. So the NAACP, there's about, I can't remember the numbers, but when I went there for a meeting, and I was there to work with the people who worked and who were actually working on this level, I think he told me something, there's like at least 30 calls a day. 30 calls a day. But they, you know, of course, if they advertised all that, we would all be walking in fear and they're afraid and guns and everybody trying to protect themselves, so they can't put all of those out there. So they get them and then they decide which one will be released. So the media does, I think the NAACP and other activist groups. And so the goal is, and I was telling them, you know, you don't want to re-traumatize yourself, so think about who you are and how you deal with stress and pain, because that's what's happening. You're going to have more pain. You're going to have more anger, you're going to become more stressed. So the job is to keep that low. So if it comes on, when they tell me, if I do decide to do one, they say you have to watch the video, you have to listen to the reports, I will wait a couple of days because the first one is never the full report, it's never the full story. So if you wait 2 or 3 days, then you'll get the full story, you'll get the full report, and I only have to watch it once. And so therefore, if you're going to watch it, you'll hear it because everybody's talking about it. And so let me just wait a few days before I watch it, because if I watch it right when it happens, there's going to be 7 or 8 different videos that come out, and ultimately later on you get the full view, as we always do. And so wait if you can, you know, and if your family and friends are talking about it, you can have the conversation. But of course the images that we see, they impact us and they stay with us longer than the conversation does. And so visually we hold on to that. It's just like the same thing when you're grieving. All your senses are impacted. What you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch are impacted when you grieve. And so when you see that, you're going to grieve. And so for some people, the research talks about how our hearts are heavy and they hurt, and that's true. You do have heartache and pain, and people can die from grief because their heart does hurt and they begin to have heart palpitations, or you can have a heart attack or a stroke. So you can die from grief because what happens is your heart connects with someone else. If I've been married to someone 60 years, and you know, we're here, and that's our grandson who was just beaten and murdered, and then one of us watches it 7 or 8 times and has a heart attack and passes away. Now I'm by myself. And I'm still watching these images, but I don't have my spouse to comfort me anymore. So I'm dealing with the trauma of what happened to our grandson. Now I'm dealing with the trauma of the loss of my spouse. And then I'm alone, and my heart has connected to that person, and they beat as one, and that's how one flesh happens, and the blood, right? The connection through the soul tie. And then what happens, once that soul tie is gone, that person is gone, that heartbeat is gone, my heart aches, and then eventually I go. And that's why people say, well, he passed away, and then 6 months later or a year later, she passed away. And then if there's grief with that, if we're dealing with a child or someone that passes away, especially in traumatic situations like someone being murdered, and the parents have to watch it repeatedly, and we as the world are watching it, along with the pandemic and everything else that's going on, we take on some of that grief, and we take on some of that pain, and we develop PTSD, situational PTSD. So that's why you can't watch it over and over again, because now you have situational PTSD. And so be wise about how much you take in, when you take it in, and then make sure that when you're talking to your kids, you tell them the same thing. I tell my boys, we're gonna watch, when they were younger, we're gonna watch this together. I don't want you to watch it anymore after this. I don't care how many times your friends say, watch this, and this is why. So I gave them the education. This is why I don't want you watching this. Now, they still make the decision when they're teenagers, and when they're little kids, they might sneak and do things, but at least you have educated them as to why you don't want them to watch this. And I say to them, you know, there's never, so my kids, when I was younger, I was very, very pro-black, and my mother was. So we have this Afro-American history book. It's like an encyclopedia. So growing up, they always knew who they were, where they came from, and they watched Roots. They watched the Ben Carson story. They watched Malcolm X. So the education, whenever they had to write a paper, it was always on an African-American male, so that coming up, they knew who they were. They knew the value of being a black male in America, because it wasn't going to be taught to them. You know, that was my job. That was their dad's job, and that was my parents. They put it, my mother was Big Afro, Angela Davis, you know, in that movement. And so I think it's a part of training up your child in the way they should go. We have to let them know America's not safe for them. You know, we want it to be, and we're praying and hopeful and continuing to watch the change, and we're out here fighting, but still to this day, I have to worry if my son's gonna make it home. You know, and my 20-year-old, he just turned 21, and they know if you ever get pulled over, turn the phone on, put it up, sit it next to you so that I can hear the conversation and I can record. And he called and he said, "Hey, Mom." Now, he's never been pulled over, and I had just said to him, "You know, you drive fast in this little bitty sports car. You drive too fast, slow down." And it's like a Mitsubishi Eclipse that's really old. But what happened was the police officer pulled him over. He did exactly what he was told. Yes, sir, no, so, put his hands on the wheel. I'm reaching for my license. I'm putting my hands on the wheel. The officer said, "I'll be right back." And this just happened 3 weeks ago. And I'm sitting there on the floor in the kitchen praying, "Lord, let things go well. Don't let him have any issues." The guy comes back. He looks. He says, "Hey, I see you have a birthday coming up." I could hear it was a white officer in St. Bernard. He said, "Yes, sir." Still hands on the steering wheel. He says, "Well, you have a birthday coming up. I'm going to let you go. You don't have anything on your record. I'm not going to be the first one to give you a ticket. Have a happy birthday." And I'm like, Jesus, thank you, God. You know, it could have been a bad situation. But he saw nothing on his record. He's 20 years old. I see he's not even 21. He was like, "Just take your foot off the pedal." He said, "I sure will." And he was like, "Mom, it went great." You know? And I'm like, "Yes, it did." But, you know, you just don't know. But they've been trained how to deal with that. Shouldn't have to be.
But it's a reality of our lives, right? And again, just a reminder, thanks so much to you, Dr. Shantel Thomas, for being here with us. We want to turn to our audience for questions. What questions do you come with? Perhaps we have some online, but let's open it up. What questions do you come with? You got an expert sitting right here before you, so let's take advantage of her expertise. You can come to the mic right in the center aisle.
Dr. Shantel, my name is Rob Robinson. Social media now is putting a lot of pressure on our young people and even on older people, especially in terms of bullying and competition and all of this stuff, and creating a great deal of stress. What are your suggestions on how to counsel around the use of social media?
So that's a tough one, because so many kids are on social media and they have all the accounts, and so many you can't keep up with. I have told parents, you know, if they're under the age of 18, limit the amount of time. Just like when they play the video games, limit the amount of time. When my kids were young, I had a little box, and at night, to make sure that they did sleep, the cell phone went in a box. All the electronics goes in this little box outside their doors. So then you know they're not up under the cover, you know, on social media or doing whatever else they need, that they're getting the rest that they need. And my thing was, in my home, once you turn 18 and you can move out, you can do whatever you want, or 21, however it is when you leave. But we have to make sure that we still monitor some of that. The kids now have access to so many different things on social media. We have girls and boys as young as 10 and 12 that know how to get to the porn sites, know how to get to the sex predators are out there. They know how to search for how to buy a gun, how to create a suicide. You know, so all these different things that they know how to search to do. We don't, I wasn't thinking about that at 10 or 11. And so what we have to do is take the phone, put the parental guides on the TVs, on the social media, and then when they get to a certain age, have the conversation first. My kids, I said, "Why do you need a phone? I pick you up, I take you to school, I pick you up from school, give me a justification for why you need it. And so it was at 16, now they're driving, now they, so we have to always know that just because everybody else does it and has access, we don't always need to have access. I have a few kids now that's how the parents, that's the punishment that they have. When they get in trouble, Snapchat's taken, I have one now, Snapchat is taken off of her phone because she got in trouble. And she's like, I'm gonna die, life is over, it's just social media,
Wow.
And so I think that, we have to, again, have the conversation, about why do you need it and how much access you can have to it, and sometimes tying it to time outside, spending time with friends if the chores aren't done, if you want to have someone come over, if your grades aren't well. So tie it to something to help them learn that this is a privilege. It's not like you actually get to have Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and there's 2 or 3 others that are out there now. They keep popping up. There's new ones every day.
Right, there's a right to these
yes,
things.
Yes, yeah, there's a right. And so, and it's a privilege too. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We still got time for a couple more questions. Are there any more questions? The mic is open.
Well, while we're waiting, I'm having a men's mental health day.
Why don't we talk about that while we're waiting for someone to come to the mic?
So I'm having this Men's Mental Health Day. It's May 11th. It's totally free through a grant. I do one for women, and a lot of men said, hey, you've had this one for women almost 7 years. You've only done 2 for men. Have another one. So now we're doing this next one, May 11th. It's free. Lunch is provided. There'll be networking and vendors of men's items. So like a beard. Someone's doing a beard, gel, lotion, and shoes and clothing. So it's just a lot of men in the city that will be talking about it. Councilman Scotty Johnson will be there. A couple of pastors are coming out. So these are men that are in my practice that will be providing. They're the mental health therapists that work with men. So they're going to be talking about depression, anxiety. We're going to have a women's panel, how to talk so your woman will listen. So we'll have a couple of pastors on that panel, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70-year-olds. So we're hitting all age groups,
right.
Single, married, and divorced. So we have a mixture because men have said, well, how do we engage with women? So now we'll have that panel there. And then there'll be a fitness session. There's a guy who has his own fitness gym. He does boxing and things like that. So they'll get 15 minutes of movement. So, I'm trying to get the word out, that mental health is for men too.
Absolutely.
And not to be afraid.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And I just want to remind you that this incredible event, Men's Health Day 2023, is on March 11th. Is that right?
Yes.
March 11th, 2023. Yes. March 11th, 2023, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And where are we doing this again?
This will be at 2324 Main Street. It's Christ Emmanuel Christian Fellowship's Youth Center. Wonderful. So it'll be in the Youth Center.
Let's pack this out for Dr. Thomas, this incredible event. You know a young man who needs these services, so grab them and let them know we're going on March 11th. We're going to the Men's Health Day 2023.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Asbury. What advice can you give to a youth who, African-American youth who is growing up in a predominantly white environment, schools, and things of that nature, and then they get around their family and or African-American friends, and they're told that they sound white, they're talking white, or so forth and so on, and then they're not possibly accepted by the Caucasian group as well because they're African-American. So they're struggling with this identity situation of being black, growing up in a white society, and not being accepted by their African-American family members even, as well as, maybe they were bused to school. I grew up in Chicago. I was bused to school. There was 1% African-Americans in my school. Right. And I grew up in a situation when I was at home and played with the kids around the house. I sound white, I'm talking white, who do I think I am, things of that nature. And then I go back to school and I'm fighting literally because I had someone call me the N-word. So how do you address that?
So,
Great question.
yeah, thank you. I had the same experience. I grew up in Indianapolis and I was bused to a school. And of course you had to come home and fight the kids in the neighborhood.
Right.
who would say, "You sound white." So the kids that we work with now, and I haven't worked with kids probably in about 8 to 10 years, like small children, but I know we have a few kids now that have even been adopted by white families and they're African American. So what we say is connect to the culture. So maybe the people in the family don't understand, but that's education that takes place in the family. You have to have those courageous conversations about, hey, we can't shame or make a family member feel embarrassed because they're going to a school that's different than everyone else. So we as the adults have to watch our language and our interactions and not make this family member feel isolated. So conversations on every level have to take place, and we can't be afraid. Now, there might be some disagreement or arguments, but again, the parent, I always said I'm the biggest advocate for my son. So nobody's gonna intentionally or unintentionally hurt or harm them, even if it's my own family. You know, so it's my job to make sure that if you are, I'm gonna let you know this can't happen anymore, and these are the reasons why. And this is what will happen if this, we're not gonna come over here and be abused, mean, degraded. And there's nothing wrong with this person going to another school. Now, in that school, there's some advocacy that has to happen too, you know, for that child. And then making sure, I have friends that are teachers out in different school districts where there's a small number of African American kids, and they started in Indian Hills. My girlfriend started a whole, like the Black Student Union, but it's like the Black culture, so all the African American kids can come together there, feel safe, have conversations, have events. They do an African American Black History Month event every year, and the kids put it on. So there's different ways to help that child, but I think we have to talk to that child. We have to have conversations about, you're living in two worlds, and all of us do. We all do. We all live in two worlds. We are some way where we are at home, and then when we're out working somewhere and we have to be professional or have a certain look or whatever, sometimes we have to bridge those gaps by not using some of the language that we can use at home, and other times we can be more true to ourselves. But we've all had to do that at some point in time until we could be our authentic self. And so we have to teach our kids that we're gonna be in two worlds just because of who we are. And when we try to better ourselves and other family members can't, they might hate on you. You know, as kids say, they're haters, you know, so, and you have to accept that. But there are gonna be some family members that still love you and accept you as well. But we have to, again, those conversations are very important, so, to have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shantel Thomas. Can we hear for Dr. Shantel Thomas, who did such a wonderful job today? Thank you for being with us and for sharing with us. And we want to remind folks about that Men's Health Day 2023. Again, that's March 11th at 10 a.m. at Christ Emmanuel Christian Fellowship. Christ Emmanuel Christian Fellowship Church. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is just one segment, but we will do many, many, many more. And I look forward to seeing your face in this place again. Until tomorrow, when I see you at our usual time for Happening at the Heights, may God continue to bless you and may heaven shine upon you. We'll see you again. Peace. God bless.
Welcome to the Heights, changing lives for the kingdom.